Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom. Welcome back to our discussion about the Middle Ages. Well, sort of, kind of, not really, right? So the big thing about it is that we've actually spent the last little bit of time talking about a lot of things that aren't the Middle Ages at first. Well, sort of, kind of, not really, but all stuff that's going on at the exact same time, right? So the big thing that you need to understand before we go any further and before we get any faster into this 12-minute flip is that you need to understand that we are studying right now an about 1,000-year-long period. This entire unit takes place from the years of 500 AD to about 1500 AD, give or take like 50 to 60 years on either side, right? So looking at that, then we started looking at the Byzantine Empire, right? We started talking about the monsoon marketplace in the Eastern Golden Age. So far in our study of this time period and of these 1,000 years of time, we've already talked about this region, which was the Byzantine Empire. We talked about this region, which is the monsoon marketplace, and the rest of the unit is going to focus on this part of Europe, right? The western half of Rome, the medieval European period, right? Medieval, of course, meaning Middle Ages. So just a lot like that Greek Dark Age that we talked about, the Middle Ages are basically just going to be a time period that focuses on the idea of reorganization, resetting, and starting all over again. And a lot of people over time have referred to this as a Dark Age, right? Now, particularly Renaissance thinkers who actually came after about like 1450, 1500 AD, they're going to be the ones that called it a Dark Age due to the fact that they were like, oh, there was so little intelligence and blah. They weren't completely wrong. Now, if you ask certain professors at universities, they will fight you about this. They'll be like, no, medieval Europe was the best. And I'm just like, no, it wasn't. I hate it. So now looking at it, though, why is it referred to as a Dark Ages by Renaissance thinkers? Mostly due to the fact that, one, there was a limited amount of learning, right? Now, granted, this is important to kind of note, though, that, the Romans had to start somewhere. The Romans started in mud huts, right? In wattle and daub huts, where they would then make a little version of it and shove your dead body inside of it whenever you died, right? The Greeks started out very, very simple with, early bronze periods, and then the Minoans are going to, explode and, start making frescoes and stuff like that. Well, they didn't physically explode. But what I'm getting at is that every single society has to start somewhere. And this is basically Western Europe's starting somewhere. So, of course, they're going to have limited learning up front. Of course, they're going to have poor leadership up front. And, of course, they're going to have bad economies up front due to the fact that they don't know or have the infrastructure for trade yet, right? So the big thing I got questioned down here is, where's the bias, right? So, what bias means is, do we favor one side or another, or do we look at things a certain way, right? So, because of, bias is just a hard thing to explain. But the big thing about it, though, getting into it is, when we're looking at the Byzantine Empire, of course they're going to make things like the Hagia Sophia. Of course they're going to be just like this, because they've got thousands of years of Roman technology, ingenuity, engineering, and academia to work with, right? Whereas this is what a Middle Age or medieval castle looks like. Not nearly as good, right? Because yet again, they're starting over, right? They're starting over, so of course they're going to be behind where the Byzantine was and things like that. And then also the bias exists as well, is that there were a lot of Eastern cultures that were doing a lot of big things and were growing on their own, right? The Umayyad Caliph, which is a map that you can see right here. We're going to talk about this a little bit later on. We get into the conversion of the Arab tribes to to Islam, and then all of them becoming Muslim. And we'll start talking about that as well to discuss how the Eastern Golden Age was a period of great progress for the people of the Eastern kingdoms, and that basically in the long run, the only people that were really struggling during the medieval period were medieval Europeans. But again, struggle is relative. A lot of this is just a reset button. They're just starting all over again, right? So looking at the medieval period, what you need to understand is that in the grand scheme of history, it comes between three distinct time periods, right? We talked about this on the board, but to give it a more formal definition and stuff like that, it's important that we jot this stuff down. So the ancient time periods, or classical civilization, refers to anything from the Neolithic Revolution up to the fall of Rome. So we're talking mostly about the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, and the ancient societies that came before those guys. So that's all known as antiquity, or ancient times, or the classical civilizations, right? Classical is used to refer to Greek and Roman because they were so fancy, and their art was so great, and their intelligence was so great, and then they were at the peak of their existence before their respective falls, right? Then you've got medieval Europe, right? Now remember, This Middle Ages defining period is for Western Europe. It's not for the whole world. It's just for Western Europe, okay? It's very important that we understand that the other communities throughout the entire world would have other tons and tons and tons of different ways to define their history. But in Western Europe, the medieval European period is from the fall of Rome up to the Renaissance, right? It's that reorganization reset period. And then we have the modern era, which is from the Renaissance to today, right? The time period that we are talking about has also been called the Middle Ages and has also been called the Dark Ages. So that's where medieval Europe fits into a timeline itself. But when you're taking the medieval European time period itself, this 1,000 years, this 500 to 1500 AD period, you've got 3 different stages. And yes, yet again, we have time periods. Y'all's favorite, I know y'all love memorizing time periods. Now, all right, so now the big thing about it, though, is the first time period is the early Middle Ages, which goes from about 500 to about 1000 AD. This is heavy amounts of reorganization, big time spread of Christianity, and also the other big thing is organization of areas into kingdoms and consolidation of barbarian tribes. Then you have the High Middle Ages, which is going to range from about 1000 to 1300 AD, when Europe started hitting its stride, right? They started hitting a period where they were like, oh, we're learning. Oh, we're writing. Oh, we're getting smarter. And you got guys like St. Thomas Aquinas coming around, who's actually like using Aristotle's ideas on, does the soul like exist on this planet or does it exist somewhere else? And then you also got, last but not least, the late Middle Ages, right? Now, the late Middle Ages is very important that you write something next to the late Middle Ages real quick. Tragedy, right? So, like, something that you need to understand about tragedy. I don't mean tragedy like the plays that the Greeks did that we talked about already. I mean tragedies like the Black Death Plague, the Great Western Schism, the 100 Years War, right? The Crusades, all these things that happened that are super intense and led to the death of a lot of people, right? The late Middle Ages was actually a pretty rough time. And all of this begins with the fall of the Roman Empire, right? All of this stuff begins with the fall of the Roman Empire. You like these animations? Like, yeah, oh my God, like, look at just how hard I tried. Like, look, we'll just go back again, and this is like, Now, now look, but when the Roman Empire fell, the beginning of the Middle Ages starts, okay? And as we know, this started due to a lot of different reasons, right? Rome is going to fall because their money lost value. Rome is going to fall because of invasions/migrations of barbarian tribes, right? Barbar, remember that word that means to babble and stuff like that? And we also know that in 476 AD, Rome is going to officially fall to a band of people called the Ostrogoths. And you're going to see the end of the Western Roman emperors, right? So when you're discussing that, you have to now understand that if Rome has fallen on the Western side and there's nothing there anymore when it comes to the government, when it comes to their infrastructure, when it comes to the people using those roads that they built, because all what? That's exactly right, guys. Good job. Like I said, very, very impressed. I heard all y'all over there. Sophia Davis. Now, so the big thing about that as well, when you're talking about this entire thing, now that no one's there, the only people left in Western Europe to reorganize, reconsolidate, and start taking over the land that used to belong to Romans are those people that we talked about 2 classes ago, those barbarians, right? Well, the word barbarian is very, very important to understand, okay? Because first and foremost, we talk about barbarian in the modern context as a person who is uncivilized, right? Now, the thing about it is, though, they weren't that uncivilized. A lot of this word actually comes from the word in Latin, barbar, which means to babble, right? And babbling, of course, means the idea of they're like, blah, 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 blah. Romans called them this because they didn't speak Latin, right? Like, so, and then eventually, over time, Romans would use this word to refer to people that they deemed to be uncivilized or savage, right? Like, for example, Romans didn't like barbarians that much in a big way because, like, barbarians wouldn't water their wine down so they could drink it all day long, and barbarians would drink, like, water and then mead and other beers and brews and stuff like that, and the Romans were like, oh! That's disgusting. So, like, then later on, they're going to realize as well, they called them uncivilized because they didn't have sophisticated government or art practices or reading or writing and stuff like that. But again, though, the Romans, guys, come on. Y'all have had like 1,000 years to work on this, right? The barbarians are just getting started out. And they're also still semi-nomadic, right? So the thing about it is, though, these people who called themselves uncivilized, the people who called them uncivilized were the Romans. And to Romans, everyone was uncivilized. They conquered in the pursuit of land and resources. So something that you need to understand about barbarians is write this down. They are semi, S-E-M-I, hyphen, nomadic. What semi-nomadic means is that they still occasionally move from place to place to find new resources, new farmland, and new foods, right? And so they don't move as much as people did during the Paleolithic period, but they are still having to move because they don't have sophisticated farming and like agricultural systems, right? And another big thing too is when most people imagine barbarians, they imagine these giant swole dudes with tattoos on their faces and like 18 swords and stuff like that. Like so, but in reality, barbarians didn't look like that. They looked something like this, right? They looked like a cheaper version of a Roman soldier, right? They made more items out of wood, they used cloth armor and stuff like that, and they just didn't have sophisticated military practices or art practices like the Romans did. And so this is what I'm getting at with this whole thing. The barbarians, don't judge them Romans, they just haven't had a chance yet. The barbarians had kings and governments. Well, kinda, like eventually they got better at it and stuff. They created money down the road. They're going to figure it out too. And they're also going to be the ones that settle all of Europe, and they're the origin of its current day people, right? So most of you in the room are related to some type of barbarian, right? So like, for example, my family is originally from England, so we're related to the Anglo-Saxons, right? Like, so like, now I know there might be people in here that are from, like their family descends from Ireland. You're descendant of the Celts, right? And there's all kinds of different barbarian groups, right? There's going to be these invasions. The Asiatic barbarian groups are going to be the Huns and the Magyars from Russia and Eastern Europe. The Germanic barbarians are going to be the Saxons, the Angles, the Goths that are going to come out of Western Europe. And go ahead and pause this real quick and write those down, but I'm going to go ahead and get one more thing in before we actually end. And then also you're going to see the rise of Germanic peoples when you see the Ostrogoths in the Italian peninsula, the Visigoths coming from modern-day Spain, the Angles and the Saxons who made Anglo-Saxons, which is the people that, like, my family descends from, and the Franks in Central Europe who would then settle France, right? So the big thing about it is make sure you have that nice list of barbarian tribes. We'll talk more about this later on. I will see y'all soon. Y'all are killing it. Keep up the good work. Y'all have a good one.